Welcome to another episode of Leadership Synergized with our good friend, Dr. Jay Staley. Dr. Staley, thank you for being here again, my friend.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Last week, we had a chance to hear from Dr. Staley, who's made a transition, but stayed in his expertise area. And he talked about some of his process, if you will, on making that decision point, but also some of the data points he looked at. And Dr. Staley, we learned from him, he was a PE teacher that moved into business and finance. Not your normal route per se, but it's one that's worked out for him. Dr. Staley, you talked about your grandfather, Dr. Koopman, and others who've been significant in your life. And when you stop and think a moment, and you talk through your path of starting out in the business world in college and then moving into education, classroom teacher, assistant principal, athletic director, coach, into central office in finance, there's been a lot of aspects that I'm sure that you have focused on to serve your growth, to be able to ensure you're bringing the value your school community needed, your teachers needed, your students needed. Talk about Jay Staley's approach.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as it's just kind of growth, right? So having a growth mindset to me is huge. I think that might be the biggest takeaway of anything is oftentimes as we age, we get set in our ways. And so how do we break down those barriers? What kind of research are we doing? Who are we talking with? And more than that is just being willing to listen. Are we, at the end of the day, we may decide, yeah, that either doesn't fit or I can, but trying to find little nuggets of information. As I mentioned, it seems like we're on these bell-shaped curves of extremes. How do we break away from that and find little nuggets of information that we can always continue to grow with? My kids laugh at me because every time I get ready to say something, it's like, oh, hey, I bet you read this in an article somewhere. Because that's usually what I start out with. Hey, I read this in an article or I saw this. And I'm always sending them little tidbits of information. But to me, again, it's having the growth mindset. It's remaining curious. I ask lots of questions. I'm just a curious person. And I think to me, that's the way you stay up to date and you stay sharp and you're willing to adapt and be able to move along.
You mentioned growth mindset. It brings back, you and I had a few conversations around Dr. Carol Dweck's growth mindset philosophy and book as you're going through your doctorate stage. And yeah, I find it interesting at times. And I wonder, have we moved forward enough with that openness to consider growth versus fixed mindset in our world?
I think it depends. I really think it depends on where you're at and who you're talking with. I think there's certain circles, yes, but in other aspects, no. I think some of us like to think we may have a little more growth mindset than perhaps we do at times. And sometimes that's hard to admit, I think. But again, I think it comes back to what I mentioned last episode. I think the pendulum just swings. And so I think sometimes we in education get caught up in what's the flavor of the month club. I've heard this, I've done that. But I think, so I had a great teacher that I worked with at our building at one time. And it was every time somebody come back from central office with a new initiative, it was just give me the highlights. Let me pull out the nuggets of information that we can build upon and use, because certainly there are. And let's factor out the noise. I think that is a good approach. But again, as far as I would love to say everyone has a growth mindset, but certainly that's not the case. But those that do, I think it helps and lends them to being able to achieve things that they want to in their life.
You took the step, talking about your own growth, to pursue your postgraduate degrees, your master's and your doctorate aspect. And in many states, there's a great deal of focus on high school graduates moving straight to the workforce. Some concern that maybe there's not enough attention for the higher ed piece. Talk a bit about Jay Staley. Why would Jay Staley pursue that postgraduate aspect and earn the master's and the doctorate?
Yeah, I think it depends on what your career goals and aspirations are. For me, I didn't want to put myself in a position where I couldn't do what I wanted to do because I didn't have the correct credentials. Whether I ever used them or not, I wanted to have them. That was it for the doctoral program. And so as I moved from school administration into central office, I didn't have to have my EDS. I didn't have to have my superintendent's license, but I wanted to because I felt it helped validate the position that I was in. And so I achieved that. Then I just stayed pat for a bit as I started thinking about next step in my career. So if I wanted to do some consulting upon retiring, or if I wanted to be a superintendent, to me, I needed to have my doctoral degree for those things to happen, at least in my own mind, to make it valid. Then I pursued that and was able to thankfully attain those degrees. And again, it just, I think, adds to my preparation just for being able to look for doors and be able to seek opportunities and not have that be a barrier for not being able to achieve them.
I appreciate you sharing your personal view and your personal experience in that aspect. And certainly it's for each individual to make that determination in that regard. But it's another opportunity for that growth piece. Sometimes you don't necessarily know the growth you're going to have when you enter into those areas. Dr. Staley, you've talked a lot about your education experience and the roles you've played. Let's talk about Jay Staley as a leader. One of the things I appreciated about our times a few years back when you were going through your graduate degree work was the opportunity just to sit back and talk leadership. Sometimes leadership involves numbers, they involve finance, but there's a lot more to that. And when I hear you talking today, last week, and reflecting back a few years, Jay Staley is a well thought out individual. He's a fantastic communicator and has the ability, as you said, not as a salesman, but just as a human being to connect just right from the get-go in the conversation. Talk a bit about your leadership development. Has Jay Staley always found those areas and others that have made you successful natural, or are those things you've developed and learned over time?
I think as far as going back into a leadership capacity, I was thinking about that as we were preparing to have this conversation. My high school basketball coach, Don Salaki, Coach Zlaki was a tough coach to play for. He was in your face and spit flying and all that good kind of stuff. And so I happened to be the point guard on the team, and the expectation was that I was the extension of him onto the court. Certainly my approach as far as trying to be a leader wasn't the in your face and spitting as his was. He had a little polar of opposite approaches at that point. But I took away some great things from Coach Zlaki. One was just preparation. Preparation and practice should be much harder than getting to a game. How you prepare yourself is important. Attention to detail is crucial. And so just not letting little things go. So making sure he would stop practice if somebody was not doing whatever it was that we were supposed to do at any specific time. I think learning that attention to detail was huge. But the one I think I took away from him the most was that everybody needs something different, and they may need it at different times. So there's going to be some times you just need to put your arm around them and give them a pep talk and a pat on the back. And there's other times they may need a kick in the pants. It's trying to discern some of those things and when you need to do those. And I think it's just by trial and error, trying to see what works and what doesn't work and how do you motivate people. I think that's for me where it developed. And then I just was fortunate enough to be put in positions where people saw something in me that gave me the opportunity to be able to continue those foundations that was built upon.
Yeah, as you reflect back on your growth and development, the maturation as a leader that you see yourself as today, and you reflect back maybe 20 or 30 years, what do you think those individuals just starting out today with their growth as leader, the development of their leadership toolbox, what are some of the challenges that they're going to face that maybe you didn't face, and what suggestions or guidance do you have for them?
Yeah, I think as far as challenges, you can only help people so much, right? If you can, as though the whole thing, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink kind of thing. As a leader, there's going to be those. There's going to be some that resist and some that you have to push and pull and drag, and it's figuring out how to help those. I think there's also a balance of doing too much. You have to empower others, give them the tools, the responsibility, hold them accountable, but you have to let them do it. I use it as the analogy of a toddler trying to learn to walk. If I always hold their hands while they're walking, they're never going to learn to do it on their own. So whenever you have to pull those fingers apart, you can encourage and have them coming to you and offer those encouragement pieces, but ultimately they have to do it. I had heard someone mention that tough times make tough people. I think that's truly what you have to do as a leader is empower and invest in others. You have to give them open and honest feedback and have that open and honest communication. No secret scores. If there's an issue, make sure that we're not keeping some kind of secret score in the background. But I think one of the best ways to, when you look at an organization, successful organizations, people are always plucking their leaders because they want to try to recultivate that experience at their own place. And to me, that whenever people are doing that, it means you're probably on a pretty good path from an organization as far as the climate and culture that you've been able to build in developing leaders within your organization.
Excellent advice. One of the things I heard that going through public education with the leadership piece that really resonated Dr. Staley, well, sometimes those building leaders or those instructional leaders, yeah, the responsibility that they carry and they place on themselves is that they have to be the ones to do it all because others just don't have the time. And that it comes from a sense of care and love in that regard. But to your point, and it's hard at times when you're in the midst of all this work. We talked last week about doing more with less and how that just continues to expand in this environment a bit. Sometimes when you're in the midst of that, you may not see that you're really not alone in this, in that piece. It really brings to the question, the still leadership philosophy that Leadership Synergized is built on is really not because I executed this very well in my lifelong career, but because when I reflect back, and in all honesty, the most success that my team and I had was when we stepped back, we recognized we needed to just be still, reflect, make the decisions we need to, and then take that next step forward in that regard. There's so much pushed at us, pushed at leaders, pushed at educators that keeps things moving fast at times that we lose sight. We can put the brakes on and just stop for a little bit, regroup, and then move forward.
I think that is excellent advice. We had that conversation when I was at my last school district, and we had instituted so many different initiatives. It was like, we just need to take a step back. Let's let people catch their breath, and then let's reassess and move on. We have so much information coming at us continuously, and there's this need to always change. And so while I think there's a good piece of advice, and you can always incrementally get better, but it doesn't have to always be these overhauling kind of things, right? So how can you just move the needle a little bit? It's like compounding interest. Those little things are going to add up and make change over time.
Yeah, I was going to go. It's sometimes more like a 40-minute cake baking in the oven instead of a 30-second microwave, right? Everything doesn't have to be microwave to still taste good and for us to have a meal.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Staley, one of the things that I hear each time we talk, and certainly I know our listeners and viewers are picking up as you resonate with your experience and your knowledge and your philosophies, is just the passion you have. I turn that passion into love. The love comes out naturally, that you love what you're doing. You love the people you serve. You love the kids in the classrooms, those in the school community in that aspect. And how do we allow that love to stay in our educational world and not get shuffled out by the data piece? And don't get me wrong, I recognize data is so important, but there's times I ask, have we went too far with data that we lose that love, that relationship aspect, maybe to where we need a lot of that to synergize?
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult, right? And because I think we have gotten into such a data-driven decision-making piece, while I will sign up as being the first person in line wanting all the data. My wife and I don't know if it was on this time or my last, so she's a director of special education. And we have lots of conversation walking our dogs. We've joked that we're going to have a podcast, the two docs dog walk talk or something. We try to balance each other from that perspective, because she really has the passion and the emotion for, hey, we have got to find a way to do these things. And I'm like, but there's only so much of these dollars. Having that thought partner to be able to bounce some of those things off of is great. In reading a book recently, Never Split the Difference. It's a negotiations book, FBI negotiator. So he talks about, as you're going in negotiating like your life depended on it. Emotion has to be managed. Emotion just can't be pushed to the side and say that, hey, we're just not going to deal with emotion. We're dealing with facts. It doesn't work that way. For those of you that like to work in facts, which sign me up, that's me, is we've got to figure out a way to deal with the emotion. And there's so many things going on in schools, and there's so many, what my wife would refer to as ACEs. So these different traumas that either students have or whatever it may be that people have gone through in their life, or staff that you may not know anything about or what they're working through. How do we recognize those pieces and make sure that we are continuing to communicate all the good things that are going on in the school world, all the different things that we're trying to help with? And I think so to combat many of the negative things that we hear, it's just going to take more of the positive things. Unfortunately, it's just no one wants to carry those on the news cycle. So how do we as school districts and school leaders and those that like it, make sure that we're just flooding social media or whatever it may be with those good stories of things that are going on in the school world?
Great advice. I love the way you put it. You said it very well, because it is something that's very important and it's near and dear. We're talking education, but I would argue that it exists in other industries as well, those needs in that perspective. And again, I get it. Data is so relevant, but it needs to be the right data at the right time, not all data. You talked about so much coming at us at points, and individuals have to be comfortable, select the data point that makes sense for the moment you're in and use it. And next time it may be a different data point in that particular aspect. Dr. Staley, as we head down to the finish line here of this episode in these 2 weeks, again, thank you. God bless you, my friend, for all you represent, educators, leaders, and the world you're in. The passion as an individual and the positivity you bring, it resonates very, very well. And in each conversation, so much respect there. What's next for Jay Staley? Okay, you've moved into this role that really fits you. What's next?
Yeah, I see myself staying in this role for a period of time is my hope. We're trying to grow our school practice where we are. So our conversation is, how do we shift from the being municipal advisors, just from this pigeonhole from a finance perspective, to how are we municipal consultants? School districts have lots of needs. And so how do we help you to evaluate assessments or your programs? How are we doing that? Staffing drives the large number of your budget. How can we help you do a staffing analysis? What are the different areas you as a school need help with? We're wanting to try to help partner and find a way to help solve those solutions. That's where I'm at. That's what I love doing. We're trying to rethink our team as well. And so not everybody grew up in the school world like I did. And so how do we get out and serve the schools that we're working with? Let's go see the buildings that we've built. Let's go be in the classroom, go read at kindergarten days or whatever it may be. How do we make sure that we as a team stay connected to those things? So that's where my passion project lies in the short term, is trying to help develop those pieces and just continue on and trying to plug in wherever we can to help make schools successful.
How about from a personal growth perspective for Jay Staley? What's your focus? What's next in that area?
Good question. So teaching is something that I love. And so trying to pursue what that looks like in some form or fashion, whether that ends up being something externally or internally, training within our own staff, if that's the way that works out. It may end up doing some corporate teaching with webinars, those kind of things for school districts. We're trying to build out some libraries of opportunities. My wife and I are working to be empty nesters. So our youngest is a junior in college, so we're the quasi empty nester. She pops in from time to time, but we're working through what that looks like. So again, I say it tongue in cheek on the podcast side of things, but truly she and I may work on something, either a podcast or a newsletter or something along those lines. We enjoy bouncing ideas off each other and holding each other accountable to things. It's a good thought partner. So we've been married 28 years here in January. Don't ask me why we got married in January, but we did for whatever reason. We're looking forward to see what the next few years have in store for us.
Congratulations. And the collaboration, when it occurs, I'll be one of the first listeners. So Dr. Staley, if someone listening or viewing would like to reach out and talk to you and learn more, how do they connect?
Yeah, so easiest way on LinkedIn. If you're on there, you can pick me up on there. Again, I mentioned earlier, self-promotion is not my thing. Being on social media and trying to do that has been a chore and a challenge, but I'm trying to make myself do it. Hashtag Friday Finance for Schools is what I've adopted. My goal is that either it's going to be a newsletter that drops monthly on a Friday, or a Friday nugget of information is where I've been. You can catch me on there, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also reach me at j.staley@bakertilly.com. If I can ever be of help or service in any way, I'd love to help.
And it'd be value add. And Dr. Staley, finally, last word of wisdom for those out there looking to further develop their leadership skills, their servant skills.
My whole thing is remain curious, have that growth mindset, build a board of directors, both personally and professionally. I heard a superintendent mention this once upon a time, and I wish I could remember his name so I could give him credit for it, but it was, who is that sounding board of people that you can go to, whether it's in your personal life or professional life, to be able to get sound advice? Someone that's not trying to sell you something, someone that doesn't have a personal agenda, someone that's just going to keep it real with you and have those conversations. Who are those people around the table? And I bet most of us have them. It's just not really naming them, I think, in the professional sense, as far as this is my board of director. But I would encourage everybody to name those people, find out who they are, because friends, family, networks, that's where our support comes from. And I think that's what keeps us going.
Outstanding. God bless you, my friend. You're a wonderful individual, great leader. What success and significance you brought to others. I appreciate you and respect you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great words of wisdom. For Dr. Jay Staley, I'm Kevin Smith. Thank you so much for listening. Wow. I hope you've enjoyed these 2 weeks as much as I have. Don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Staley because the vault is not empty with the knowledge, the expertise, and the guidance he can offer. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the leadership you represent. And thank you for the service that you bring to so many in your lives. God bless. I appreciate you.